Internet Festival. Forme di futuro.
Good afternoon.
Buonasera. It's spring 2008. I found myself in Damascus, the capital of Syria, doing my doctoral work for a research about Syrian television soap opera. But my heart, my passion is actually elsewhere. It is on the promised land of the internet. A couple of years before, I was in Cannes as a journalist documenting the TV market, MIPCON. I met somebody, his name is Joy Ito. He's now heading the MIT Media Lab in Boston. We were sitting and drinking champagne on a boat, and he told me, look at this. One day, us drinking champagne on a boat in Cannes, wearing tuxedos and suits, all this will be over. All this will be over because at some point, the internet will make us coming all together horizontally without champagne, without tuxedo. And so I go back to Syria, which is where I was studying, and it is a moment in which the excitement for the empowerment granted by the internet, it's at the top level. There is a crowd of young people willing to code, willing to hack stuff, willing to do something for this promised land of the internet, progressive and horizontal. And so I give a call to Joy and Larry Lessig and the people who started Creative Commons. At the time, Joy was the chairman of Creative Commons. And I said, how about starting a Creative Commons community in the Middle East? And they said, well, go for it. You know, we are in a horizontal culture, why not? And I did that, and I spent 5 wonderful years of my life moving from Syria to Algeria, Bahrain, every place in the Middle East, going from one geek fest to the other, going from one bloggers meeting to the other, going from tech meetings, all of these things with an amazing crowd of people that were ready to kick asses because of the internet. 5 years, Creative Commons are aboard. And meanwhile, I was living in Damascus, and with my best friend, a web developer, Bassel Safadi, we opened a hackerspace, a makerspace. It was called the Aiki Lab, borrowing from a Japanese word. He was a geek. He used to code stuff inside the lab. I used to give workshops about Creative Commons, copyright reforms. Sometimes we used to have guests, such as Mitchell Baker, the head of Mozilla Firefox, Larry Lessig, the head of Creative Commons, Joy himself. It was an amazing moment in which we had all the Silicon Valley coming to the Middle East in order to exploit this youth that was about to explode in the streets of the Middle East. In March 2011, we were ready to host our first Twitter festival. We had designed that logo, the bird of freedom that comes out of the cage. It was planned to happen on March 26, 2011 in Damascus, but life is always ahead of technology, and in fact, March 15, there was actually a real revolution happening in the streets of Syria, and a couple of days ago, the Mukhabarat, which is the secret police, came to see us, and they said, your Twitter festival is over. Get the bird back on the cage. Do not do anything related to freedom of expression, because now we have riots in the streets. And well, for me, the situation was, of course, much easier being an activist, but also an academic, and of course, wearing an Italian hat and passport. So at some point, I left Syria, sadly, and my friend, my partner, Bassel Safadi, was in hiding and working for the revolution for several months when it was taken by the secret police in March 2012, and then he still, unfortunately, disappeared. Actually, 1 year ago, he disappeared from a civil jail, and is now, we do not have any news about him. This is the campaign that we try to set to make some awareness about him. And again, Syria, which is like the most powerful part of my life. When I left Syria in mid-2011, I felt, after witnessing the peaceful demonstration in the streets, the creativity and the amount of peaceful act of political contention, I set this website with a bunch of Syrian friends, academic and activist friends. It's called Syrian Told. At the time, we thought, you know, we want to do something to preserve and archive the peaceful side of this revolution. We feared that this would disappear or it would be in danger. But of course, we did not imagine what actually happened now, which is reality, that the Syrian story is sadly told only from two sides. One, the Assad regime, the side of the brutal dictatorship. Two, ISIS, so a terrorist organization. Where is Syrian civil society in all this? It has unfortunately disappeared, and the empowerment that we were dreaming of because of technology, it's actually not there anymore, it seems.
My name is Geert Lovink, and since 2004 in Amsterdam, we're running this research center. It's rather small, but with the tools of internet that we further developed, we know that you can in fact achieve a lot with very few people on the ground. People are connected, and the research that we do anticipates the changes. So our methodology is quite simple. What we do is we develop a critical attitude and insert that in the emerging technologies. Now remember, usually this is done the other way around, right? You look at the technologies and then in the rear mirror you look back and criticize it. Our idea, coming from activism, was of course the opposite. We need, and we in Europe in particular, we need to insert the critical concepts already in the phase of development. We cannot wait. The story of Syria is clear. We cannot wait, so we have to get involved. We cannot copy the concepts of Silicon Valley, so we have to invent the critical concepts and business models ourselves. And we do that in a disciplinary context together with artists, designers, researchers, hackers, and many, many more who are involved. So over the years, we've looked at critical Wikipedia studies, especially a long project on online video, the whole, let's say, birth of YouTube. So we've been following that for 10 years, encouraging critical practices in that field. And now we have focused more and more, in fact, on the field of publishing. Right now, with the rise of smartphones and tablets, digital publishing is finally becoming very prominent. And so we opened this initiative. In fact, it's kind of parallel. It's called the Publishing Lab. And there we do a lot of experiments. Outside there are free flyers and also publications from our Institute of Network Cultures. So please feel free to take them if you're interested. One of the other projects that is running at the moment is this a coalition, this network of people who are busy with alternative revenue models. Alternative revenue models are important to formulate an answer to the dominant business model of Google and Facebook and others who are saying you have to give everything away for free and then in exchange you give back your private data, right? This is the Silicon Valley consensus, and we are all part of it. You have all signed those terms and conditions, and in fact you do that all the time. They are renewed, we are all complicit in that economy of the free. And we all know that it in particularly hurts the ones who are producing things, right? We're talking about journalists, artists, but even hackers, designers. A lot of professions are affected by this very poisonous economy of the free, which has led to an incredible monopoly of very, very few players, right? So this really reflects the neoliberal capitalist economy in that only very, very few monopolies are left over in the end, and that then is sold to us as a free market. So after the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, which also hit Holland quite badly, the Netherlands, where we are based, we started this and said, we need to give the internet a financial component, a monetizing element, because the core of the problems is this model of the free, and we are very happy to give away everything we do for free, but that needs to be a free choice, not the default. So we are in favor of the gift and the gift economy, but only if it's done voluntarily. My Money Lab then, of course, developed and really picked up. Now this is the third one, and that, of course, has to do with the rise of Bitcoin and the blockchain, which have, a promise of this financial integration into the whole texture of the internet. And there are other elements to think of. Mobile money in Africa, for instance, is one example, but also think of crowdfunding. Another campaign that we're doing every now and then is related, of course, to the issue of privacy, and it's this design contest called Crypto Design. And in fact, that's running at the moment. It's part of the larger movement, which a lot of us associate with Berlin and the Chaos Computer Club and Netzpolitik and so on. All right, a European movement that is dominated by German agenda to protect privacy of the average citizen. Okay, and what I do every now and then is I bring my research together in a book, quite a traditional book. The last two ones were published in Italy by Bocconi. And here you see the titles, and they are kind of examples of what we call internet criticism, right? Internet criticism is not kind of Euro pessimism. It would be nice. I'm quite in favor of Euro pessimism. If we radicalize it and if we really play it out. I'm very in favor of performing the pessimism, right? So not just sitting at home and being depressed, but really work out our collective negativity. Europe is a unique continent which still embraces negativity, and so for me that's a very productive and creative force. The criticism is not only focused on Silicon Valley, obviously. It's not an anti-American movement in that sense. But you can compare it maybe a little bit with the rise of theater criticism. We are here in a theater. And remember, the theater critics, the literary critics, they are not the enemy of the theater. They are not the enemy of the books. The literary critics don't hate books. Right? No, they want to raise the standard of the books, and it's very much like that with net criticism. Okay. Yep. Now we come to the first of a number of topics that we want to raise here. And the state of the online self is one of the topics that we are both very concerned about. Why? Well, I've already mentioned, of course, Snowden, NSA, but also Facebook insistence that there is no second identity, right? Mark Zuckerberg comes back to it this time and again. We are not allowed to express ourselves in a parallel identity. We need to give our real name, our real telephone number, our real identity. Otherwise, and the problem here with the status of the online self is, of course, that these days people more and more only use Facebook, and the internet becomes identical to the social media, right? Especially if you look at the statistics, more and more people cannot distinguish between the two. So the online self has less and less ways to perform in a wild and creative way, right? And in particular, think of the selfie, of course, where the selfie has to look in a very, very particular way, right? So all the standards, the protocols, the way we look at the picture, they're already pre-programmed.
Yeah, and speaking about the selfie, actually we choose these images. Yeah, well, I mean, you can have a look at both. Because, of course, we did it on purpose to take two selfies that are coming from, well, the turbulent area of the world where I mostly work with. This one is from Syria. She's a famous journalist who actually went to report and document a cleansing of an area which was allegedly occupied by terrorist group. So once they get there with the Syrian army, she takes a selfie with the corpses behind her. And this one from Tunisia at the border with Libya, if you remember, Ben Gardane, there was early this year, there was a terrorist attack happening. So these are basically the Tunisian soldiers getting rid of the terrorists and taking pictures of them. So the point is, when we think, especially in our part of the world, when we think about selfies, we have this in mind, right? We have beautiful girls, dark faces, mostly women, let's say, let's face it. There is a huge gender issue about selfie, like stupidity of women going, for example, to the bathroom and taking 35, whatever, pictures of ourselves with lipsticks and so on and so forth. But actually, this is a very restrictive reading of the selfie. It's probably the most actually banal reading. But I mean, actually the selfie, or this is a very interesting way of looking at the performance of the self, because actually the performance of the self, the way it is right now, it's so much related also to violence. I mean, this is the banality of the evil, right? It's la banalità del male, alla Hannah Arendt. People dealing with violence and warfare in war zones, and actually performing their selves, embedding their selves with the violence in the war zone. So this is also a manifestation of the online self that we have to take into account. I think that the issue when it comes to discussing the performativity of the online self is that so far the readings of the internet to this extent, where we have an online life and an offline life, right? But so far very few have started to analyze what does it happen when actually everything melts, everything is mixed, everything, when there is no clear separation between our online self and our offline self, right? We are the same person, so we need a different instrument to analyze the situation. We cannot just like switch. Somebody yesterday, when was interviewing me, he said, how many people do you think there are outside in the real world differentiating between the online life and the offline life? And I was kind of guessing that probably no one. Yeah. no one, right? Are you differentiating between your online life and...
Yeah, but it used to be so different, right? 20 years ago.
It used to be very different.
And the internet promised, the elaboration of the other self, a parallel world which you could develop, which we still find traces of. For instance, look at the kids, how they perform, other identities when they play games, computer games, online games, right? There you can still see a certain, naive enjoyment there of the possibility to become someone else. And this promise of the multitude of identity, right? It's still there, but the reality, the daily life of people, in fact, gives them less and less possibilities, which is strange because, remember, the technology is fluid. We can reprogram it, right? It's not a given. Facebook is not a given. The structure of it can be changed. Instead, we experience it more and more like a techno unconscious. And this is kind of the topic that we're going to talk about now, because in fact, what we see happening is not internet becoming more and more visible, more and more important. No, quite the opposite. It's withdrawing. It's becoming part of the everyday life, and everywhere we see signs that it becomes more like a utility, like electricity and so on, right? Which we take for granted, and we accept the network architectures with all its paradigms and so on, and continue with our lives, right? So this is also a call, I would say, to get involved, because we fear that the possibility to change these networks from the inside on a fundamental level is disappearing as we speak.
This is why we have decided to call our talk today From Dada to Dada. We believe that it's very important, it's crucial actually to go back to an avant-garde approach. Geert was mentioning the techno-unconscious. It might seem like a Freudian term. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We are trying to say that we need new tools to look at the internet. We are sick, tired of big data, algorithms. The algorithm is not a given, guys. It's not an ontological reality. We do think that it's important to go back to psychoanalysis when it comes to the pulsion that the selves manifest online. We were talking before about dating. What's the difference? What are the boundaries between like an acceptable, sanitized version of sex, such as Tinder, for example, and what has happened recently to our fellow citizen Tiziana Cantone? Why is a blowjob not acceptable if we as human beings are indeed related to sex as our human nature, while a sanitized version through Tinder, it's kind of okay, right? Because it's sanitized, because actually it's also, you can make money out of it, it's clean, you can put some ad on it, you can make money, it's related to platform capitalism. But we have to think, when unfortunately sad things such as the Tiziana Cantone thing happen, that it's probably not the right place where to look at. It's not politics, it's not regulation, it's our own selves. Maybe we do need new psychoanalytic tools to look at these things, because the internet, the way it is right now, it's about our pulsion. We showed you the selfie from Syria. This is about death. That is about sex, death, sex, eros, thanatos. I mean, it's pretty clear that we do need to go back to something which, in fact, was elaborated in a period of our mankind, especially in Europe, of our culture, where First World War was happening, you know. Dada is a movement which happens in the First World, during the First World War, the birth of psychoanalysis also happening between the two wars. I mean, there's something related to periods such as this one, warfare and violence, and something that recalls to our subconscious that we have to look at.
Dada was expressing in an artistic way, in a very radical way, a kind of a return of the repressed, right? It tried to materialize the repressed. There is also another reading, let's say, that what we will try with this avant-garde approach is to reconnect with the invisible and with the forces that structure our everyday life, that structure our social life. And that's the next issue we want to discuss here, and that's this question: what's the social in social media? Because this is not very often discussed. We talk about social media, but we never really ask anymore the question what this social is, right? In the 90s, I would say 20 years ago, it was pretty clear. The social was a virtual community. You were part of a virtual community in which you participated. And that virtual community often gave you the possibility to unfold your radical individualism. This was the idea. Not only to embody a communal spirit. No, the community was also a tool to express freedom. It was a medium in a way. Go back 20 years later. It becomes very difficult to go to and talk to any young person and ask them about their network in Facebook or in Instagram or whatever medium, right? They will be able to list a few friends, but yeah, that's it. All the rest they don't know, right? All of them have 500 plus friends. Because that's how the system is operating, and we've heard that you can buy the likes, and so the social is something that is almost automatically generated. So this is kind of the old social, the old idea of the social life, which is the social movement related in one way or another back to the 19th century question, the social question. And the problem, of course, is that the institutions that we see at play here, the social movement, the political party, the trade union, and so on, they are no longer providing us with the framework for the social. And so the social is something that becomes very implicit, and in fact, the social media as we know it don't really even give us the tools to create communities, right? Facebook is not interested in giving you online tools to create a community, so because they can't make money with that.
Yeah, the withdrawal of social from political struggles, it's happening. As we speak. Actually, I brought this from Syria. This is a Nokia campaign. This was just 1 month before the uprising. The slogan of the campaign says quintessentially social. And on the on the smartphone, it's written something in English, actually. Do you fancy a film, or should we eat sushi or a steak frit, So basically the idea that these advertisers, together with, of course, the Syrian regime who was baking this campaign, was that, yes, we can be social when social becomes market freedoms, when social becomes the freedom of buying sushi together, of going to a movie together, the freedom of basically consuming. The freedom of being consumers, not the freedom of being politically active. So this was in the making in Syria. The idea of a quintessentially social was that quintessentially social means quintessentially consuming, quintessentially neoliberal. And the irony of the situation, because life is always ahead of whatever technology we have, is that 1 month after this campaign was released, this smartphone, whether Nokia or Samsung, whatever, but the smartphone as an object was taken over by a class of people, young people, who were not interested in eating sushi or watching a movie. They were interested in using this tool to document what was happening in the streets, to document the demonstrations of people who were willing to topple a regime, to document the demonstration of people who were claiming their human rights back, people who were claiming a dignified life and freedom, for example. So the social, as we saw it before in the struggles that we had in the last century, was finally back in the streets of the Arab world in the beginning of 2011. Unfortunately, as we know the story, neoliberal capital, I would say, and sorry if I'm being Marxist, which I am, neoliberal capital struggled also to get back to this idea that actually there is a sanitized version of sociality, which is what we can do with the smartphone. Exactly, swiping, liking, thumbs up, this is what we are allowed to do. But protesting in the streets to get back our freedom, no, this is not allowed. And the tragedy of Syria, which is also what I think it's a tragedy of the commons, is that an entire generation of people, including my best friends, spend at least 3 years documenting everything with this smartphone in the firm belief that this would be common ownership, right? This would be the commons. This would be what Joy Ito was advocating about, what Larry Lessig were advocating about, something which will end up being a common ownership,
in the
right?
public domain.
In the public domain, exactly. But then the tragedy of the commons is that all these people who filmed in the belief that what they did for the sake of revolution, for the sake of a political goal, could actually be shared, actually proved wrong. If you look at the situation right now in Syria, all the citizen journalists, all the media activists have went back to a model of ownership which is pretty much like traditional, where I sell content, I produce content, and in fact I put this slide because this is a slide from a film which you will never get to see, because unfortunately there is a dispute about the footage. The film was made out of these commons, but because of the tragedy of the commons, this footage cannot be shown to people. So half of the documentation of the Syrian uprising, it's unfortunately not visible.
What were they shooting when they were in Syria? These early, filmmakers. What scenes? They were documenting atrocities or attacks?
They were mostly bearing witness. So yeah, documenting attacks, a human rights violation, in the belief that this visual documentation would one day serve to bring criminals to court, to The Hague, in your country.
Yes.
Which really didn't work. But so the commons is like a tragedy on several levels, not only on the Syrian level, right?
Yes.
We do have our own tragedies.
So for a long time, in the internet context, the commons was indeed associated with this Creative Commons initiative, which is about license to create an alternative for the dominant and no longer working regime of copyright. Nowadays, with the internet spreading in so many different fields like healthcare, agriculture, transportation, logistics, and so on and on, the internet itself also has kind of left the narrow field of media production and is really integrated in all aspects of life. Eugene Morozov has documented that a change, and we all are aware of that. With the smartphone, we are measuring our quantified self, how healthy we are, and if we do sports, and so on, right? And which goes way beyond the question of media and media representation. And what we see here is a movement that, to also tell something more on the positive note, is a movement that has grown behind the scenes very much in Europe, but across the globe. It's the peer-to-peer movement, which believed that we can, if we further build on this idea of decentralized networks, and if we fight against these, monopoly platforms, that we can build a more just society. And the Peer-to-Peer Foundation is calling this process, which they see as a gradual process, not a revolution per se. They call this commons transition. And we are very much part of this network, and the most interesting and inspiring models recently have been, the self-organization of people who are tired to participate in Uber, if they are taxi drivers, and in Airbnb in the case of house owners who want to rent out their place. It looks like there is no alternative, right? We have to, if we are a taxi driver, you are forced to participate in Uber, but there is no, there is no must there. We can do it in a different way, and Trevor Schultz and many others are collaborating and gathering these examples of what they call platform cooperativism, co-ops that spring up everywhere to create an alternative.
There is another tragedy. There is another tragedy of the commons, right? Which is that the internet we were promised of was not made of celebrities, but now we have celebrities.
The promise, of course, of the internet was a horizontal organization.
Like Joy told me in Cannes,
yes.
No more champagne,
no.
we'll be equal.
Yes. Maybe not equal in the egalitarian sense or in the communist sense, but networks that would not, that would spread out, that would not concentrate. And here we look at, the tragedy of the celebrities, in this case in the hacker community, where we see that, celebrity behavior is very much introduced along the same lines as we know the celebrity from television, the radio, the magazines, and so on. Right? So, and this is a very strange thing to witness, that the internet is creating these new forms of concentration of power and of attention. That the attention economy is becoming much more centralized and concentrated. And Julian Assange of WikiLeaks is a classic example in that case.
I think we do have a great example in Italy too, Geert, which is a M5 movement. So far, this M5 movement has been depicted as a grassroots movement coming out from the web and expressing the very core of web culture. And in fact, I do think that this is actually expresses much more like a continuity with the post-televisual culture. I see so many similarities between the obsession of the M5 movement for transparency and live streaming, even of like small, banal details. As it is an obsession, I see a lot of similarity between this obsessive live documentation and the dictatorship of transparency with what we had back in the 2000 reality TV culture. You know, there is much more continuity between Berlusconi era and Grillo era than a rupture. I don't see any rupture, actually. I see a continuity, and I don't think that we are right when we say that M5 movement expressed the culture of the internet. Well, if the culture of the internet is creating these new egos and celebrities, such as Assange, then maybe. And in fact, Assange can talk to Grillo, but I mean, is this the internet that we were promised on? Is this really, what does it mean to have a transparent movement, to have a really decentralized movement now? Let me be provocative and saying that unfortunately ISIS it's much more decentralized than M5, I have to say. When it comes to their media strategy, for example, they have a center producing the main horror documentaries that you have seen, but also they have thousands and thousands of filmmakers everywhere, like people just taking selfie or making videos and feeding the networks from different nodes. Unlike a political party, which of course, even if a political party like M5 claims to be a radical grassroots movement, in fact, they have a press officer, they have a communication strategist, they have one video maker controlling the video content of everybody. They have a head of communication. So is this, I mean, of course, this is the structure of a political party that requires to have a centralization. And ISIS, as a highly ideological terrorist movement, of course, doesn't require centralization. And it can allow itself to spread around the network. But the point is, going back to our celebrity discussion, is this the internet that we were dreaming of?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so this is the Truman Show. Yeah. And often we find ourselves encapsulated in this kind of TV reality show. And the whole movement of the internet, of course, towards the visual, but in particular even the moving image, the television, think of Netflix, and then beyond that even to real-time webcasting is very, very strong. So if alternatives need to come up, we need to go back to to the basic level and say, how can we build those decentralized networks, which is kind of a part of the mythology. We can see that even in Bitcoin, Ethereum, blockchain rhetoric. It's presumed that there is still a decentralized network infrastructure. But the fact is that even in Italy, in many, many countries across the globe, there are only very few data centers. So the internet is, in fact, it's questionable whether we should call it a network to start with. And we want to close here with this idea, this proposal that we put on the table to organize much, much smaller units. Here we call it an avant-garde of organized networks to counter the weak links of the social media and to really start to rethink which social ties we want. And this doesn't necessarily have to be done in secret. Of course, there can be a crypto element in the story, but not everything that we do is necessarily secret or secretive. So there can be an element in it of open conspiracy, but we need to really shift the emphasis to much smaller units that really can get the work done. Because right now we are in this madness of the real-time media, of the social media.
Thank you. I think we want to wrap it up and maybe just...
Thank you.
Internet Festival. Forme di futuro.